And then along came somebody who said, well, we ought to let all boys and girls go to school then in that circumstance. And as we expanded to that, somebody came along in about 1820 and said, we ought to let all boys and girls go to school free. Can you imagine what the taxpayer said? If you were getting your winter tax bill at that time, what you would have said? How are we going to do that? Where are you going to get the money? How are we ever going to handle that? But we did it. We called it the American Free School. And after people had lived with that for 40, 50 years, they thought that's the way school should work. And then we had another very famous case. 1894, I believe was the date. It's called the Kalamazoo case, right here in the state of Michigan. And it said, everybody shall be entitled to a free public education in the United States up through grade 12. Oh, if that judge had only been perceptive and said for the rest of their life, you wouldn't even be here today. But he said up through grade 12. And so we ushered in the school that you know today. And you think it's very normal for us to pay for everybody to go to school. In fact, in the last few years, I say few years, 20 years, we've moved from that being a privilege to being a right. You know, only 20 years ago, you could throw a kid out that didn't behave the way you thought they ought to behave. Now you can't do that. I think the maximum time in the state of Michigan is 9 days you can suspend a child. So it's become a right. And I'll give you one more example that'll make it even more current. When I was a high school principal, I had this forest primeval, 60 acres. All these kids I looked after, they were my kids. My rule of thumb for getting ahead in education was to say, schools are for kids. Still use that today. Got to do something for these kids. Got to help kids. Use that emotion. Don't use logic. Use emotion. And then somebody came along and said, we ought to provide grades 13 and 14 free of charge for kids, like they do in Canada. And I said, are you kidding me? We don't have enough equipment. We don't have enough materials. The world is using electric typewriters, and I still got manuals. I don't know I have enough shop equipment. I don't have a nice enough building. And you want to add on 2 more years? Baloney. And I stood against that. Why? Because it conflicted with my paradigm. And yet now in the state of Michigan, we have a community college, which is grades 13 and 14, paid for at public expense. And everybody accepts that as a part of the paradigm. Nobody gets upset about that. So a part of what I'm saying to you is, it's just a matter of getting used to the idea that if we could move from just boys to boys and girls to boys in schools free to everybody up to grade 12 to everybody up to grade 14, what's so unusual to think about the possibility that we could educate everybody? Number one. But there's a second part to that.